So the story number one that we're going to discuss and listen to some analysis is about the phenomenon called a higher education bubble. Now what a higher education bubble is the fact that in the United States people have to spend crazy amount of money to actually go to college. Now this is far more than compared to what we have to pay here in Poland, even at private universities. So the first movie starts with an introduction of the topic of higher education in the United States. There's a comparison of education to the cost of education and their increase to the financial crisis, when the houses were rising in prices very rapidly. And now, and also the author will be talking about the fact that everybody wants their kids to go to college. However, the costs of education are increasing at a rate of about 7.4% a year, which is a lot, far more than inflation. And as some say, since the 80s, the prices of education have grown 3 times or 4 times. So you have to pay 3 times more money than you did, or 4 times more money than you did in the 80s, whereas the education you're getting is pretty much the same, and the perspectives you're getting are also pretty much the same. So it's disproportionate, and many parents believe that you actually have to go to college and it's still worth its money. And then we are presented with a student who studied women's studies and religion and and got heavily in debt. She's about $100,000 in debt, which is a lot of money. If you multiply that by 4, it's almost 500,000 Polish zlotys. So a lot of money for education that doesn't really offer much job prospects. So she has to pay $700 a month and earns $2,300. So she doesn't really have much left after that. And also there is information that private schools cost about $60,000 a year, and public schools cost about $30,000 a year. So if you want to go to a private school, which is something that many people want to do, it costs a lot of money per year to even have a chance to go through a 4-year college. So this will be the first part, and I want us to listen to this first part of the video. So the way we do it, you can actually observe the video, and we'll comment on the second part later on.
The buyers think that what they're buying will appreciate in value, making them rich in the future. The product grows more and more elaborate and more expensive, but the expense is offset by cheap credit provided by sellers who are eager to encourage buyers to buy. Buyers see that everyone else is taking on mounds of debt, and they're more comfortable when they do so themselves. Besides, for a generation, the value of what they buy has gone up steadily. What could go wrong? Everything continues smoothly until at some point it doesn't anymore. Yes, this sounds like the housing bubble, but I'm afraid it's also sounding a lot like the still inflating higher education bubble. College is getting more expensive, a lot more expensive. At an annual growth rate of 7.4% a year, tuition has vastly outstripped the consumer price index of 3.8%. It's skyrocketed past spiraling healthcare increases of 5.8%. Even the housing bubble at its runaway peak pales in comparison. Now, consumers would balk, except that, as with the housing bubble, cheap and readily available credit has let people borrow huge amounts of money to finance education, and both students and parents continue to believe that whatever the cost, a college education is a necessary ticket to future prosperity. But is it? Well, meet Courtney Muna, a 26-year-old graduate of New York University, recently reported by the New York Times to have nearly $100,000 in student loan debt that her degree in religious and women's studies did not equip her with the actual job skills to repay. Payments on Courtney's debt are about $700 per month, equivalent to a respectable house payment and a major bite on her monthly income of $2,300 as a photographer's assistant earning an hourly wage. And, unlike a bad mortgage on an underwater house, Courtney can't simply walk away from her student loans, which cannot be expunged in bankruptcy. She's stuck in a financial trap, and she's not alone. You know, even students who major in programs shown to increase earnings, like engineering, face limits on how much debt they can sanely amass, and with costs approaching $60,000 a year for many private schools and $30,000 for state schools, six-figure student loan debt is fast becoming the norm.
Now, the consequences of such high prices of education are that some people are actually delaying marriage or resigning from marriage altogether. Now, this is not the only problem. This is not the only problem, because other people also resign from home ownership. They cannot go take a mortgage and take a loan to buy a house because they have such a huge student debt. So the student debt is, in the United States, is over $1 trillion. I don't know what the exact number is right now, but it's, I think, close to $2 trillion right now. And the student debt is bigger than the auto debt and credit card debt. So it's and the credit card debt in the United States is a big thing. So it's a huge problem. Now, and the author also says that there are some problems with higher education achievements. So people who go to college, they don't, after examination has been conducted, it turns out that after that research that not many people actually, I mean, there's a huge percentage of people who don't benefit that much from higher education. So the conclusion of the story number one is that people are getting hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to go to United States colleges, and sometimes they're not really getting that much value out of their education, which of course is a problem. And in the second video, we're going to see an interview where this problem is discussed in more detail, and we're going to see what other problems are there with what other problems there are with the American universities. So in the second video, we're going to see what other problems there are with American universities. We're going to listen to an interview with an expert in the topic, and we'll see what is wrong with the United States universities.
Now, for many, the debt is enough to quash marriage plans. I mean, who wants to marry someone with huge amounts of unpayable debt? It's enough to prevent home ownership and generally wreak havoc on the debtors' lives. In fact, total student loan debt in America has passed the $1 trillion mark, more than total credit card debt and more than total auto loan debt. But as prices have been going up, learning seems to have been going down. A recent book, Academically Adrift by Richard Arum and Josipa Roska, found that 45% of students did not demonstrate any significant improvement in learning during the first 2 years of college, and 36% of students did not demonstrate any significant improvement in learning over 4 years of college. The primary reason, according to the study, is that courses aren't very rigorous. In fact, a recent survey of more than 700 schools by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni found that many have virtually no requirements. Perhaps that's why students are studying 50% less than they were a couple of decades ago. And all of this is happening even as millions of people with college educations can't find jobs. Today, many graduates are already jumping the tracks to become skilled manual laborers, plumbers, electricians, and the like. The Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts that 7 of the 10 fastest growing jobs in the next decade will be based on on-the-job training rather than higher education. And there'll be hands-on jobs that are hard to outsource to foreigners. If you want your toilet fixed, it can't be done by somebody in Bangalore. People pursuing these careers will have greater job security in today's economy and will be free from the crushing debt amassed by their more educated peers. Bubbles form when too many people expect values to go up forever. Simply put, the cost of higher education has far outpaced its actual value. The bubble is going to burst. And to purchase this broadside, please visit us at www.encounterbooks.com.
So the story number 2 is delving deeper into the problems that are right now plaguing United States universities, and to be more precise, the interview focuses on Harvard and Yale, so the very top of the Ivy League universities, and delves also deeper into the problem of political correctness, which has been something of a phenomenon also very typical to United States and the Western culture and Western universities in general, which hasn't really affected Poland that much. But so to get an outside perspective on it, we're going to listen to the interview. Now, who is the person who is being interviewed? Now, Peter Thiel is a very famous investor. He's a thinker. He's the first person who invested in Facebook, and he invented PayPal. So he's rich, successful, and has a lot of interesting opinions. Now, in the beginning, he mentions that universities. You're going to listen to this interview and see that he mentions that universities have gotten worse in the last decades. That some people just say that these top universities have value, and that's why they have value. It's just like people who are famous because they are famous. The interviewer even goes as far as to call the top U.S. colleges political correct asylums, so where political correctness is really the norm, and people get offended by everything, and you don't really have much free speech. Now, and to give you another perspective on this idea of political correctness being going mad in the United States universities, is the article that the Telegraph published of John Cleese, who's the one of the stars of Monty Python, who said that he will no longer perform at United States universities because political correctness have killed comedy, and so he decided that this is simply not what he wants to do anymore. So there you go. Now, Peter also goes on to say that the Ivy League universities are like the Studio 54 nightclubs, which, if you don't know, it was a very famous nightclub back in the days, and they are good for your social status. So very rich people went to this Studio 54 nightclub, but it was bad for your morals. So he draws a comparison between nightclubs and exclusive places like that and United States colleges. So let's listen and hear Peter actually express his opinions.
A situation where Harvard and Yale, or the New York Times, to skip over to another kind of institution, they're institutions that have value because people say they have value, right? It's that simple, right? I, having been to Yale, I can say that it has really, really minimal actual value. There's no question in my mind that the value that it has is.
I think when you're saying things like this, that's not what you're not even supposed to say this.
Why?
Well, because if they have value because people say they have value, then if someone like you says the things you're saying right now, that's undercutting what other people are supposed to say.
Right. Well, that's the whole point of this. That's why we're here. I don't mean to freak you out, but that's exactly what I want to talk about, because you realize this is true, right? There are people who are unwilling to say that, or unwilling to see that they've become politically correct asylums. There's pure madness, and their kids, you're spending all this money so that your kid can catch this virus and have a messed up worldview forever. And once people realize that, people stop giving money, once people stop saying, I want my kid to go to that place, those places won't any longer be able to have the value that they're seen to have. And so
I'm slightly more pessimistic. I mean, I think they are very robust. They're not going to go away that quickly. The analogy I would have for Yale or Harvard is it's like a Studio 54 nightclub. And you have, which is probably bad for the morals of the people, and maybe it's good for their status, and we can sort of debate which is more important, which is less important. But these institutions are remarkably robust. If you were a university president at Harvard, Yale, Stanford, one of these places, and you had some secret fantasy of getting lynched, and you wanted a coalition of alumni, students, faculty to come after you, you'd give a speech saying, we are giving such a great education that we're going to increase the enrollment. We're going to let more people in. We're going to double or triple our enrollment over the next 20 or 30 years. We're not, since we're serving the whole world, in 1970 there were 200 million people in the U.S. Now there are 8 billion in the world. It's 40 times many people. We're just going to double our enrollment. We'll still be, and you would get lynched because people understand it is a zero-sum tournament. It's not a positive-sum education. It's not about education. It's a Studio 54 nightclub you're running, and for what that is, it can be pretty robust for a long time.
Yeah.
There's probably some point where it gets so deranged that
I mean, we're effectively there. I honestly have to say that where we are now, there's a brilliant novel out. I've interviewed the author on my radio program, Scott Johnston. It's called Campus Land, and it is brilliant. It's a brilliant criticism, lampooning of the whole world of, you know, Ivy League culture, but generally higher ed. And you see that it eats itself at some point. We're kind of at that point. How long can it sustain itself? I mean, again, I say the same thing about the New York Times. The New York Times has value because people say it has value. But when you really look at these places, at some point, the word has to get out to the alumni, to the parents. It's not as good as it used to be. It's not what it once was. Somehow I mean, you have to allow that it's possible to have that kind of we could call it a market correction. It has to be possible.
and I would have predicted it 30, 40 years ago. So it's been harder. I'm not saying like next decade. I think they may finally break this decade, but it's there's probably something about the student debt that's unsustainable. We had $300 billion in 2000. It's up to $1.7 trillion today. So I think there are certain trends that I can't see going on for another decade even. And so I think something is going to break.
Isn't it a little bit like the
top
Soviet
colleges?
Union?
Not so clear.
Isn't it a little bit like the Soviet Union? I mean, at some point, it has to break down. At some point, the truth will out. So the fact that it could go on for 7 decades is horrifying, but it did end, you know? And I guess I wonder, because I wouldn't have said that 100 years ago, Yale and all these places were corrupt, lost, leading young people astray. I don't think it was true. I think it's something that's more recently true, or it's a kind of a flower that has finally come to bloom. We know that Yale was going, a lot of these schools were going in those directions already in the 20s and the 30s, but it didn't really come into the mainstream so that you have the madness that you're seeing until now. So I guess it seems to me that it will take a while, but it has to fall apart. In other words, I'm not sure how they can sustain it.
You know, I think the overall system can't be sustained because of the runaway debt. The top parts of it, you know, it's possible it can just keep going because it's exclusive, and this is what drives it. You know, I think you know, I have this sort of theory that one of the reasons, you know, Republican political leaders, senators, congressmen, governors aren't going after the universities more is because they still just want their kids to go to the top schools. So if you were a senator, or
some of those people are in this room, by the way.
Or you know, and you know, it's we had this crazy college admissions thing where it was, you know, people go and get in through the front door or the back door or the side door, and you know, I think all these places, there's probably some number even at Harvard or Stanford where if you make this number, your kid can get in no matter how unqualified your child is. I think it's something like $25 million. And you know, I think it would be helpful to publicize these things, but the fact that there are people who are doing this suggests it's going to keep going for some time. And it's. But
it is. I mean, I know what you mean, and I fear you may be right, but I'm still thinking that because we're talking about this, people hadn't been talking about this. It seems we've arrived at a point where it's possible some people will see this, and if you see what is happening at these colleges, it's dramatically different. I mean, when I was at Yale in the 80s, it was hard for the alumni to know the lunacy of political correctness that we were living out. It was hard for them to get it. But now, because of the way the world is, because of social media, I don't mean to bring up a sore subject, but we have to talk about social media. But it seems to me that people can see things that they wouldn't have been able to see even 30 or 40 years ago. But that's a larger conversation. I do want to talk to you a little bit about social media. And